Thank you all for coming. My name is Diane Rosenberg. I'm the Executive Director of Jefferson County Farmers and Neighbors, JFAN. A lot of fans in the house. This is great. Thank you. And I'm really glad you could be here tonight. We have John Norris and Adam Shriver that have come here from Des Moines to talk with us about something that's just really important to all of us, and that's our water. And I know I say water in a funny way.
Yeah. You do, but not
That's the way it is. Now, it's no secret that Iowa has some of the dirtiest water in the nation. You know, it's our recreational waters are compromised, but even more importantly, our drinking water is compromised for many people in the state. We're lucky here in Fairfield because we get our water from the Jordan Aquifer. So we don't get those nitrate spikes. You know, in fact, we have very little nitrate in our water. But other communities, they need to worry about it. A lot of them do. I mean, just even yesterday in the Southeast Iowa Union, there was an article, I think it may even been in the Gazette, about communities that can't use their water. You know, that they were unable to use their water because the nitrate levels were 10 milligrams per liter and higher. You know, and that is an EPA limit that's set because anything 10 and over can basically be fatal to infants because of blue baby syndrome. So, you know, but we even saw like in Des Moines this summer where people could not, you know, water their lawns because the nitrate levels were so high, they needed to conserve water in order to reduce the amount of nitrates in the drinking water there. But that 10 milligrams per liter level, that's not really sufficient to protect human health because there's research that's showing that nitrate consumption of 3 milligrams per liter or more is linked to a number of different cancers. So that's just not okay. You know, so there is a connection. I think we all kind of know there's a connection between agriculture, water, and cancer. But this issue has been swept under the rug in our state house because big agriculture has a very strong influence in what goes on there. But we're not going to sweep it under the rug here tonight. Okay, we're going to just talk about it as it really is. And to do that, we're going to be talking about this landmark study that was done you know, like in the Des Moines area, in the Central Iowa watershed. It's the Central Iowa Source Water Research Assessment, CISWRA. It was conducted over a 2-year period by about 16 different scientists. And they issued a report last year, Currents of Change, that made the connection between the nitrates in our water and agriculture. And what they found was nearly 80% of the nitrates in the water, in that watershed that they looked at, was connected to agriculture. And that's what John and Adam are here to discuss tonight. Now, the findings of the study was presented at a major event at the Harkin Institute back in August. About 500 people packed that room online. I watched it packed that room there. I watched it online, and there were about 500 people watching it online, so 1,000 people to hear the results of this one study. And I've looked at your YouTube page, and there's been already about over 3,200 views of this video already. So one of the action steps that came out of that initial meeting was to spread the word about these findings around the state. And that's what we're doing here tonight. You know, in our corner of the state, we've come together. JFAN has organized this meeting so we can have John and Adam come and talk about what we're finding, what they have found. So we're going to start with Adam is going to introduce a video talking about that talks about the scientific findings. After that, John and Adam will both together talk about the policies that we need to implement to clean up our water and the politics of how we get there. And then we're going to have a Q&A session so we can, you know, have lots of time for your questions. So to begin, I want to just fully introduce our two speakers tonight. John Norris, you want to raise your hand? Stand up. John is a former Polk County administrator, and he's the one that came up with the idea for the study. So we can thank him tonight for that. He proposed this to the Polk County Board of Supervisors and other stakeholders. He advocated for this to happen for 6 months. He persisted. We got it.
Well done.
John has a lifetime of experience in agriculture and environmental policy. Just a couple of different highlights. He was the Chief of Staff at the U.S. Department of Agriculture, and he was also appointed by President Obama as U.S. Minister Counselor for Agriculture to 2 United Nations programs, the Food and Agriculture Organization and the World Food Program. And Adam Shriver is the Director of Wellness and Nutrition. And the Harkin Institute for Public Policy at Drake University. He's a member of the steering committee for the Iowa Food System Coalition. He's organized several conferences looking at the harmful effects of CAFOs, and you've got a podcast called Canary in the Coal Mine? Cornfield. Canary in the Cornfield. Close. He's the co-lead on a project with the Iowa Environmental Council that's looking at the connections between agriculture and high cancer rates in the state. And that report is expected to come out in the next several weeks, from what I understand. Now, Adam is also responsible for making sure this information was widely disseminated, because when the report was first presented to the stakeholders and the Board of Supervisors, as you can imagine, Big Ag was not very happy with the findings, and they did really not want them to come out too broadly. They wanted to bury it, but Adam instead offered to organize this August Harkin Institute meeting, and this information went public, statewide attention, and it just keeps, getting more and more focus and attention on it. So we have Adam to thank for this as well. So we're very fortunate to have both of you here tonight. And Adam, I'm going to have you come and just kind of introduce the video that we're going to see on the science.
Yeah. Well, just to add a little bit to what Diane said, and I'm just really grateful to be part of this process. I think this issue is so hugely important, and it was thanks to the vision of John Norris that all of this got off the ground. And so I'm really grateful to be able to play a part in helping to spread the word about it. And just to build off of one thing Diane said, because I think it's sort of a nice community organizing kind of story. The county was going to release the report, but they didn't have any plans per se to promote the report. And so a bunch of people in Des Moines were getting organized and saying, oh, we need to go to this meeting and give comments and say how important this was. And so I went to the meeting where they released the report, and I said, the Harkin Institute would love to host this presentation. And it was a great, I think, way of sort of putting it out in an offer that would be hard to refuse. And as Diane said, it turned into this really incredible event where actually we had 600 people, according to my counters, and 3,000 views on YouTube. And we had after parties, it was like the Iowa Water Quality Oscars in a way. Anyways, it was just a really huge event, and it picked up a huge amount of momentum, and led to some other things like workshops on what to do about it. Policy development from John that you're going to hear about today was probably the most important thing. We had 50 people sign up to do river and stream monitoring. So it was really like a great galvanizing force. And I think the reason it was galvanizing is kind of interesting in that, John had a couple goals for what the report would do. So John, why don't you tell me what you asked the scientists to do in this report? The two things?
Tell us what's in the water and where does it come from.
What's in the water and where does it come from, right? So they got a group of 16 scientists who put in 4,400 hours to answer those questions. And what I think is so interesting about it is just like the act of reporting these facts was almost felt like a, a sort of revolutionary moment of like, wow, like people are just explaining what the science says, but it galvanized people because we have an atmosphere where it's sometimes hard to talk about those things in Iowa. And so we're going to watch this edited version of the video tonight. The whole presentation was about an hour and a half. Michael Admire at WHO News helped edit this video into a shorter format. They're also on WHO, if anyone has connections to Des Moines, tonight and tomorrow they're going to be running a series about environmental risk factors in cancer that he put together. So I highly recommend looking for that, and I'll probably send Diane the link to that.
Yes.
But he edited a version of that kind of gets the basic information presented, and then after that we're going to talk about the really interesting part of it, which was John convening a group of people to come up with ideas of how we can actually address this problem.
River flow is vitally important to understanding the water quality and natural resources of the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers. The quantity of flow absolutely affects the quality as it comes into the Des Moines. It's a vital aspect of all of the water cycle and the hydrologic cycle and water processes throughout the two watersheds. The water is monitored throughout the CISWRA watersheds by 24 U.S. Geological Survey stream gauges. The USGS is the gold standard in water quantity monitoring for our nation. We also have an additional 20 Iowa Flood Center stream level gauges throughout the watershed to help measure river flow throughout the watershed. Some of these gauges have been in existence and operating for over 100 years, so it gives us a very long record in terms of the water quantity and the changes in the stream flow throughout the history of the watershed. The rivers are heavily influenced by climate change and land use change throughout the watershed. We've seen statistical increases in the rainfall within the watershed, rising about 20% from 30 inches annually to 36 inches annually over the study period. And the seasonal patterns also affect our water quantity, with most of our heaviest rainfall happening in the spring and early summer months. The hydrologic peak of flooding in Iowa is June. And so for May, June, and July is when we see most of our flooding. And with climate change, we see the intensification of rainfall continuing. The most recent National Climate Assessment Report has indicated for our region that we could expect to see a 10% increase in the 5% rainiest days by 2050 and a 20% increase in that same 5% rainiest days by 2100. So to put that into context, we could expect a 5-inch rain to become 5.5 inches by 2050 and to become 6 inches by 2100. With our soils being able to accept about 2 inches of infiltration on a 24-hour period, we'll see about a 33% increase in runoff, with that 6-inch rain producing 4 inches of runoff compared to the 5-inch rain producing 3 inches of runoff today. So intensification of rainfall will lead to greater runoff and greater flooding. You can also see in the graph on the lower right-hand corner that the CISWRA watersheds relative to Iowa have a very large percentage, around 80% of the land use in that area is row crop. So it's a heavily row cropped area within the watershed, and the land areas and the population within the two rivers and the watershed in total are shown here as well. In general, we've seen an increase in the flow over the past several decades. Most notably, the low flows show a statistically significant increase by about 200% in the increase in our base flow or low flow. That's predominantly attributed to the intensification of tile drainage throughout the watershed. Those low flows are coming up as the tiles continue to drain our lands throughout the summer, even after our rainfall has stopped. Our average flows have also increased about 100%, and that is also statistically significant. And so we see a base level average flow in the Des Moines and Raccoon rivers increasing as well. And then lastly, our high flows, although the increase is still minor and not statistically significant, with the changing climate, we do expect to see that continuing to increase. Climate scientists have projected for our region of the country that we will see extended dry periods that get broken by intense rain. And that was no more evident than it was last year when a 3-year drought throughout Iowa was broken by intense rain up in northwest Iowa, impacting Spencer, Rock Valley, Rock Rapids, and so many of those small communities.
The next major topic that we covered within the CISWRA report was focused on ecological health and river life. So anytime we talk about ecological health, we're really getting at the well-being of the plants and animals that form the communities that are in our water bodies. And this is a very important topic because ultimately the health of these creatures impacts the health of all of us and society. Our lives are better when the ecological communities in our water are better. There's a key word that we often like to use when talking about ecological health, and that's resilience. So anytime a water body is ecologically healthy, it naturally boosts that water body's resilience, meaning that it can handle a lot more pollution, contamination, or man-made disruption. So ecological health goes a long way for both improving the lives of the creatures that live within our watersheds and also everyone that's around them. And finally, the last major point we'd like to make when it comes to ecological health is that the areas surrounding the rivers and streams are especially important. Often we refer to these as riparian environments or riparian corridors. Protecting these environments has a number of benefits. First and foremost, this is the most surefire way to improve the ecological health of a local water body. If you allow for natural vegetation to exist in the areas around a river, you help increase the health of the fish and the aquatic organisms that live there. The second major benefit that this provides is that it can trap pollutants, so it can prevent contaminants that would otherwise be running into the stream. It can uptake them, hold on to them for a while, and generally make the waters cleaner.
I'd like to explain a little bit in the report about our drinking water resources. One of the big concerns, as you know, is nitrate concentrations. The nitrate concentrations in the Raccoon and the Des Moines rivers within the watershed exceed natural levels by quite a lot. If you look at the it's excluded here, but the plot on the left shows that the average concentrations of nitrate in recent decades, 1988 and so on, is about 6.1 milligrams per liter of nitrate in the Des Moines River. But if you go back to the turn of the century, turn the clock back, the average concentration, it's blocked from your view due to this other graph. But if you go back to the beginning of the turn of the century, it's always less than 1 milligram per liter nitrate. So there's been a big increase in the average nitrate concentration since settlement time, from less than 1 milligram per liter to say 6 on average. And looking at the map on the right-hand side, you can see that major rivers that were recently surveyed in the United States, including ours in the Raccoon and Des Moines, have quite high concentrations of nitrate, 6 to 8 milligrams per liter, or even more than 8 milligrams per liter, as shown by the inset on the left-hand side of the slide, which came up too early. But at any rate, this is out of more than 2,000 rivers recently surveyed. We're in somewhere around the top 1% of all rivers in the United States for nitrate concentrations, a very dubious distinction. Nitrate is a bit burden for the Des Moines waterworks as well, because the treatment there is expensive and it's complicated. Looking at the graph on the right, you can see since 2014 for the Raccoon River, all the concentrations which exceeded the EPA standard for drinking water of 10 milligrams per liter nitrogen. 1 year, as known to you very recently, 2025 reached 18 milligrams per liter in the Raccoon, and that necessitates treatment by the Des Moines Water Works. Now, quite unusual this year, but it has happened before. Not only was the Raccoon River above 10 milligrams per liter, but the other water sources that Des Moines depends on, including the Des Moines River and the pipe gallery, which underlies the rivers, they were all greater than 10 milligrams per liter. When everything that you have as a resource is greater than the EPA standard for drinking water, you're in trouble. The only thing left is to try to remove it, and that's what DMWW does very well, but they can't remove the entire, they don't have the capacity to remove the entire flow. And that's why the lawn watering ban had to be put into place, so that only a fraction of the total flow that goes out to customers is able to be treated. And they did so successfully and treated it below the 10 milligram per liter standard. If the drinking water flowing to customers went above 10, the Des Moines Water Works would have to make public notice and immediately begin to resolve the problem. You might ask, well, where's all the nitrate coming from? It's a good question. Shown on the graph on the right, most of it is from agricultural land, roughly 80%. And of that, 40% of the nitrate is coming from fertilizers applied directly onto the land. About 20% is coming from manure applied onto the land, and another 20% from soybeans and other legumes, which can fix nitrogen out of the atmosphere and make more nitrate available to run off in tile. Likewise, at the bottom of that graph is atmospheric deposition. About 18% of nitrate, believe it or not, is in our rain and our snow. So even that is contaminated with nitrate. And at the top is the wastewater contribution and developed land, streets, and runoff, which is actually a small part of the total watershed contribution. Des Moines Water Works reliably, as I mentioned, lowers, fortunately, the nitrate in its finished drinking water to within the EPA standards. 2015, shown on the slide, the graph on the left, was another very bad year that you might remember. The two rivers are shown at the top of that graph in orange and green, and they were frequently above 10 milligrams per liter that year also. But due to the anion exchange removal at the Des Moines Water Works, among the largest such plants in the world, they were able to get it down to the purple line on the left-hand side, roughly 6 to 8 milligrams per liter of nitrate nitrogen. Well, we shouldn't take too much comfort in that, however, because even at 6 to 8 milligrams per liter going out to the customers, that's still quite a high concentration. And the standard set by EPA was long ago at 10, based on methemoglobinemia, the blue baby syndrome, and it's somewhat outdated by recent health effects studies, which would indicate that there can be health effects at much lower concentrations, maybe 5 or 3 milligrams per liter. The concentrations that we are drinking, shown on the right-hand graph, that's the average concentration actually going out from the plant, let's say between 2 and 8 milligrams per liter. Now, these health effects that aren't a part of the standard, at least not as of yet, they include colorectal cancer, breast cancer, bladder cancer, birth defects like neural tube defects. So we shouldn't take too much. The standards could change in the future, and the recent health effects would indicate that perhaps it should be even more stringent than the 10 milligrams per liter that it is right now. harmful algal blooms, blue-green algae, can create toxins in our water bodies, and does. And these toxins include 4, which the Des Moines Water Works measures on a regular basis. The most famous one is microcystin. And once again, there's health advisories from EPA, but we've been able to, for the most part, meet those health advisories in the water that goes out to the public. That's because they have been managed to blend the waters, avoid the concentrations where they know that they're highest, and also a small amount is removed in the softening and the filtration process. But we do have these toxins that were also a big concern. Pesticides are another problem. The big 3 for us are shown on the left-hand slide, left-hand part of the slide. It's glyphosate, that's Roundup, acetochlor, and atrazine. There's standards for 2 of those, and we've been able to once again meet those standards in finished drinking water. But the problem is that Iowa, shown on the map on the right, is at the epicenter of all the pesticide applications in the country due to being at the center of the Corn Belt in the nation. And so therefore, after the pesticides are applied, if we get a rainfall quite right after that, there are concentrations in the source water that have to be contended with and treated. You might wonder, well, with all this mixture of chemicals coming into our drinking water plants, what are the health effects of all of them together? And the truth is, we really don't know what the health effects of that is.
If you think about risks related to recreation, they have implications for public health, obviously, but also for economic development. If we put a lot of time and money, taxpayer dollars, into our waterways and recreation, we need to make sure that water is safe, or else we're perhaps wasting our money. So the first thing, and I violated all of the rules of a professor. There are way too many words on this slide. Sorry. But what we measure when we measure recreational risks, the kind of risks of waterborne diseases that you might get from ingesting a little bit of our waters, or if you have an open wound, getting an infection. In order to understand that risk, we can now start to measure directly for pathogens themselves, the different organisms that make us sick. But historically, the best indicator we've had are a group of organisms called E. coli, right? The thing about E. coli is that it's a huge group of organisms, and not all of them make us sick, but a subset of E. coli do. But we're measuring the whole family, right? But we're using them as indicators. So research, the standards that we use to say whether a beach is safe for recreating or a stream was based on studies that correlated those bacteria numbers to illnesses, right, of swimmers. Our standard at our beaches, this magic number, 235 colony-forming units, or MPN per 100 mil, means that our risk is 36 illnesses per 1,000 swimming events. Okay, that's what the statistics related. So that means if you go in water that's higher than those levels, your risk is increased. It doesn't mean you're going to die. It means your risk of infectious disease is higher. And if there's no warning sign posted at the beach, that means your risk is lower, but it doesn't guarantee you're safe. And one of the things that we noticed working through all of these different data sets is that we can't tell where we are unless we have monitoring, right? Monitoring is really important. We can't see trends. We can't see hotspots if we don't have monitoring in lots of locations. The map you have here has lots of little dots, and probably from far away you can't tell the squares, which are our beaches, from the circles, which are our rivers. But these are locations that are regularly monitored by either the Army Corps of Engineers or the DNR. Polk County Conservation also does snapshot monitoring. There are other data available. Iowa State does some monitoring. But we wanted to highlight these just because we wanted a consistent data set. what we see is that E. coli in our streams is overall much higher than at our beaches. And that there's certain areas where the water exceeds the standard as much as 60 to 80% of the time. Okay. We have done some interesting recently. There are studies of genetic testing on some of these waters that help us to identify the source of the fecal material, right? And what we're finding in the urban area is that we have some work to do on our human waste infrastructure. We're seeing quite a bit of human DNA in our waters in Polk County. That's different upstream, right? We get a different mixture upstream. But if anybody thinks there's only one source of bacteria in our waters, that's not correct. We also see trends. We see trends higher levels after a rain, right? So maybe that means you wait a day or two after a big rainstorm before you get in the stream or beach. But that's not necessarily the only time that there's high risk. Some of our streams at very low flows show high risk. That means that, again, there's probably an undiluted direct discharge of some sort of waste that's going into our stream. And the risk can be high at those times too. So again, it takes monitoring to really understand the dynamics in our system. There's a lot of resources out there, right? So if you're going to go to a beach, there's weekly monitoring. Our river systems are not monitored weekly, right? So it's a little bit Wild West. But you can get informed. Look at existing maps, look at this 200-page report, read all of it. It's great. And then get informed about where your higher risks are located. Okay, so if you were unfortunate enough to get a serious infection from an exposure in our recreational waters, that could be made much, much worse if that infection is antibiotic resistant, right? We use antibiotics widely in healthcare, and some of the antibiotic resistance genes that we're finding in our streams are genes that are for those types of antibiotics that are important for public health. Again, we have just a teeny bit of data, right? So if we really want to understand our risks and the transport of antibiotic resistance in our environment, we're going to have to do some more study. But that antibiotic resistance can come from both human waste downstream of wastewater discharges, but also in our livestock industry. If there's a fair amount of work in the livestock industry to try to minimize the use of antibiotics, but they need to probably do an even better job. We can't be feeding our animals antibiotics prophylactically. We need to wait until those animals have an infection and treat them the same way we do for people. Otherwise, we are really at risk of losing the availability of those antibiotics over time. Okay. There we go. And now I'm violating the rule about really small print. Here you go. On your left, you can imagine if you can read it from the back, or your eyes are much better than mine. But we had a description of harmful algal blooms and the fact that they produce toxins that can be a risk for drinking water. They can also be a risk for recreation. So at our public beaches, state park beaches, DNR goes out once a week and several during the recreation season. And several of our cities and counties do this as well. And they measure for that microcystin. That's an indicator. That's the toxin, right? And exposure to that toxin is serious and cause rashes, but also major organ failure, right? So they can be really serious. If the water is pea soup green or kind of blue-green, do not get in it, right? And don't let your pets in it either. There is some good news on this front that I will point out. One of those bars, right, is the percentage of samples above the standard, and that's Black Hawk Beach. For the period 2006 to 2024, that beach was above the standard a little over 10% of the time. But there is a very concerted watershed project around Black Hawk Lake, and that the number of exceedances has been drastically reduced. But that required almost 100% of the landowners to get on board and work to reduce phosphorus inputs into the lake. So it is possible, but it requires absolutely everyone in a watershed to do that work.
So we wanted to wrap up by talking about a topic that really impacts every chapter of this report that we've discussed so far, and that is Claire's favorite topic of manure. So manure is a byproduct of the livestock industry that we have in the States. Iowa is one of the leaders in livestock. We raise a ton of hogs, a ton of cattle, and a ton of chicken. And anytime you have those animals, they produce a lot of manure. This has become a big area of concern over the last 20 years or so because of two major trends that we see with the livestock industry. One is that the hog industry has really taken off. At around the turn of the millennium, we had about 15 million hogs within the state. Present day, that number is closer to 25 million. At the same time, we've also seen a consolidation in the farms that we have within Iowa. There are much fewer hog producers now that they had back in the day. 20, 30 years ago, it was common for many smaller farms to have several hogs out grazing around in their pasture area, have a small collection. But now we have many more concentrated animal feeding operations that pack these hogs into closer, more confined spaces. Those two trends result in the chart that I've got shown over here on the left, where back in 1997, in our watersheds, there were about 1,000 hogs per operation. That has skyrocketed over the last 25 years. Now there are over 6,000 hogs per operation within the CISWRA watersheds. And this makes storing manure properly and safely much more difficult. It's a lot easier to take care of this substance when it's more spread out, but every time you have all these animals packed together, it becomes much more easy to spill these contaminants and have them get into the water in unforeseen ways. All of the information that we've discussed can be in the reports that are found online. We did set a goal for ourselves to narrow things down to the 6 topics that are of most concern, and that's what we have shown on the slides here. We also produced an executive summary, so this is a shorter 5-page document where we highlight these topics and the major things that we've highlighted throughout this presentation. I really encourage people that are new to the issue of water quality in Iowa to start here to get a general sense for which issues are the most important and get some of the background details that are most relevant when talking about this topic. Finally, we didn't just, for the CISWRA project, do a representative state of the science. We also had a second step where we came up with suggested action steps, things we can do to make these watersheds better and improve upon many of the topics that we've talked about tonight. And I really want to emphasize the word action here because there are 2 things that are really important to keep in mind. The first is that these take concerted efforts to make these issues better. They're not just going to get better on their own. They take the focus of many stakeholders and leaders throughout Iowa. But just as importantly, we need to realize that the problems that we have now are not set in stone. There are solutions that we know are available, and there are things we can do to improve upon all of the things that we've talked about tonight. We've broken this down into 3 different subcategories of action items, and number 1 are local and individual actions. And so really this can all start with us, of any individual that lives in and around Iowa. And these can be things as simple as helping report fish kills when they arrive, help alert authorities anytime you see some dangerous activity happening in the water, also volunteering to collect different data. The second slate of action items that we represented here were those that can be taken on a regional or watershed basis. So these will be community groups, local governments, agencies that have local chapters. There's a lot listed on the slide here. I won't go through all of these, but just know that we have in-depth descriptions of every one of these topics within the reports that we have provided. And then finally, we have a few statewide items here. So these are actions that groups that operate on a statewide level, including the statewide government, can take. And so I wanted to just close our presentation tonight by circling back to nitrate. So we've learned from Jerry what an important issue nitrate is, but I want to use this as an example for why these things aren't set in stone and how these things can really vary throughout, based on the decisions of everyone in Iowa. So nitrate has long been recognized as one of Iowa's major pollutants. And so about 10 years ago or so, the state government decided to fund one of the most extensive world-renowned nitrate monitoring networks that's ever been in existence. And this has operated for about the past 10 years or so. What we do with these nitrate monitoring sensors is there are devices that you can install by the side of the river, and they can very quickly and repeatedly measure the nitrate concentration that's in a water body. And because of this, we've learned a whole bunch about nitrate throughout the state. We've been able to identify areas that are particularly at risk, identify which sorts of practices, which strategies, things like wetlands, bioreactors, how well they work, and which ways of operating those are the most efficient. And we've also just been able to learn a lot about how nitrate behaves as it circulates throughout the watershed in Iowa. But the funding for this program has been ended by the Iowa government. Starting in the next year, we're set to contract this network from about 80 sensors that we've had down to about 20. And with this, there's just much less. With this, there is a lot less that we can say about nitrate in the state. We simply won't be able to know which areas are most at risk. We simply won't be able to know what parts of the state are doing better, doing worse. Are things getting better, or are things getting worse? So I believe when it comes to water quality in Iowa, this is a step in the wrong direction. But there are many steps that we can take that are in the right direction. And so I would really encourage anyone interested in this topic to refer to the action items that we've laid out in the report to learn more about how you can make a difference.
So as I mentioned, this was really like an event in Des Moines, and so the scientists got a standing ovation at the end, which I think is not a common experience for people who are studying hydrology per se. When Professor Schnorr asked the question, where do you might wonder where all these nitrates are coming from, the crowd reacted very similar to you guys, except we had 500 people laughing at that question. But I wanted to just mention a couple things that are happening at the Harkin Institute that I think can build off of this knowledge. I mentioned a couple earlier. One thing that I think is really interesting that Diane mentioned, the Canary in a Cornfield podcast, but one of the recent episodes of that I think everyone should know about is the Danish Ministry of the Environment. And Denmark is actually kind of similar to Iowa, where they have like a population of like 4 to 5 million people, and then they also have over 25 million pigs raised every year. So the Danish Ministry of the Environment conducted a study about acceptable nitrate levels in the water. And they concluded that the European Union standard needed to be reduced by about 10-fold. And anyways, the reason I think the episode is interesting, or if you want to just read the report directly, you can, is that they give a pretty good argument for why a couple of the studies they use are more representative than some of the studies that are often cited when talking about nitrates. And in particular, the Danish government was able to track 1.2 or 1.7 million people over time, and they had pretty precise measurements of how much nitrate was in the drinking water over that period of time. And very few people in Denmark use water filters or bottled water. So like they had really strong set of evidence to reach this conclusion that drinking water was connected to colorectal cancer. So I would encourage people to take a look at that if you want to help make the case that these nitrates in drinking water are a really serious problem, even when they're below this 10 milligrams per liter standard of the EPA. And then I also wanted to just quickly mention there's a Harkin on Wellness Symposium on March 11th that you can be there in person, or you can also watch online. But a few speakers that are related to this topic is one, so the theme this year is the treatment and prevention of cancer. And one speaker is Jesse Bell, who's a professor at the University of Nebraska Medical Center. And he studies cancer in like newborn or like really young children under the age of 2. And so one of the complicated things about cancer is that all of us have been exposed to so many things over our life. It's hard to ever draw like a straight line to like, oh, this is the the one thing that caused cancer, and of course it's never just one thing, but by looking at it in younger children, you know, the idea is that you can maybe get a stronger correlation between things that are going on. And then we're also gonna have a panel on great people in the media who have been covering this issue of the drinking water and cancer problems in Iowa. And that's gonna include Dan Keating, who was a Washington Post reporter who wrote a story, I guess a couple of months ago now. I don't know if you guys saw the story, but it said that not only is Iowa a hub of cancer, but the 6 leading corn producing states in the country all have an elevated risk of cancer for people under the age of 45. So he's going to be coming. Carrie Gillum is going to be coming, who's the author of the Monsanto Papers, and she also writes for The Guardian. So that's going to be interesting. And then Nina Al-Qaidi, who I think you know, Diane, but she's a reporter for Sentient Media who does a lot of really great work.
From Iowa City.
Oh, she's from Iowa City. Yes, okay. She's a local. So okay, so those are just some things happening. But the other, I mean, you know, John, in addition to having the vision to get this report off the ground, always throughout was focused on a question that I think is the question that we get most often in response to this presentation, which is, you know, what do we do about it? You know, like we know a lot of like people in this room, I'm sure many of you know some of the problems, and JFAN talks about many of these same problems. And so they say, well, what do we do about this now that we have this information? And John convened several meetings. So like right from the beginning, all the people who attended the session were given an opportunity to participate in these policy discussion meetings. And John convened this group of people who had really wonderful expertise in environmental advocacy and farming and many other topics that I don't want to step on John's toes, so you could say more about it. But we had these 10 different meetings over time, one in person and then several more over Zoom, to discuss a question about what we can do about it. And I think what's unique about this, and sorry if this is what you're gonna say, John, is that, you know, there are a lot of groups that have sets of recommendations out for what we should do with water quality. So Iowa Environmental Council has a set of recommendations, Harkin Institute's gonna put out something, Food and Water Watch has a set of recommendations, but what's really great about John's project that he, you know, sort of organized and orchestrated was it's asking the question of like, what would it take to actually fix this problem? Not just what can we do in our current horribly bleak legislative environment in the United States and in Iowa, but, you know, what changes would actually make a difference and fix the problem? So that's why, you know, I'm just hugely excited about being able to work with John on this, and the fact that this set of recommendations is going to come out soon. So with that, I will turn it over to John, and let's thank him again for all of his.
Thank you. Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, I'll skip the microphone and get closer to you here. This has been a joy to work on this with Adam and the scientists. I didn't go to every one of the scientific meetings because I just didn't have the time, but they spent over 4,400 hours working on this CISWRA report. It is the most extensive research report done on the Des Moines Raccoon River watersheds ever. I would say, I haven't looked too deeply, but I'm guessing it's the most extensive report ever done in Iowa on any watershed. And there are certainly similarities, very commonalities between the Des Moines and Raccoon River watershed and across this state. So I believe most of this information is applicable to the vast majority of Iowa. So that's why I appreciate you coming out. I mean, I know we're outside that watershed, but you all know, I just whispered in Diane's ear, I used to fish Lake Darling a lot, but it's just soup now. So it's impacting us all across the state. What Adam said is, yes, we had a number of meetings and discussions. We did not, and this was early on, some folks said, well, we can never get that done. We did not apply a political filter to this. Just for the same thing we gave the scientists the instruction, just tell us the science, what's in our water, where does it come from, and they came up with some recommendations. I will say this, wonderful group of scientists, 16, most of them PhD, but they got a little timid when it came to recommendations. When you work for the Regents institutions, it gets a little dicey. But we wanted to do something more extensive, which is actually, what will it take to clean up our water? Forget if we can get it passed somewhere or not. You got to start with what solves the problem, and then you work towards the solutions. There was, in my mind, 3 steps to this. One was the CISWRA report. We had to have bulletproof scientific data that tells us where we're at, so all those folks with special interests wouldn't be able to continue to muddy the waters, if you will. Pardon the pun. Second was, we had to come up with solutions that will solve the water crisis problem in Iowa. And then the third step is, now we're rolling into that, which is the politics and the advocacy. Because until this becomes a voting issue, we won't solve the problem. There's got to be pressure for decision makers to make decisions on the policies that we are presenting. So that's where we're at. So I'm going to walk through, I won't go through all the policies with you because it's lengthy, but we'll have plenty of time for Q&A. Happy to dig deeper on any of them that are of interest. But I will say that, and you heard it, the last speaker, Elliot, and some of the other speakers as well. In 2023, the Iowa legislature defunded the water monitoring network. Go figure. Okay, so our first priority, and perhaps I think if there is one doable policy that we're going to push for this year, it is to refund the monitoring network. I already made a mistake. We are not advocating for refunding the water monitoring network because it has been level funding for 10 years, and you heard them scientists talk about testing just nitrates. We need much more than just testing nitrates in our water monitoring system. And so a couple of the scientists who worked on this from Iowa City, and we'll see it in the report that comes out soon from the Harkin Institute, gave us a recommendation of what is a minimum monitoring network we should have for the state of Iowa. Because, as Diane said, you get your water from the aquifer here. Des Moines has an extensive nitrate removal system. There are many municipal systems in Iowa that don't have that extraction capacity. The only way they have a heads up if their water is dangerous for their citizens is if that monitoring network is there. So they can take whatever appropriate action or issue whatever advisories are in the interest of public health to Iowa citizens. So it is critical that we have a monitoring network as a matter of public safety. It's also critical so we can figure out if we're making any progress or not, which I think was the genesis for why they got rid of it. Because then you can continue to deny there's a problem if there's no evidence. So I used this on a call the other day with a state representative. What's there, Bob?
It's like 22 cents.
32 cents, yeah.
32 cents, yeah.
That's what it would cost for every Iowan for the state to fund a water monitoring network. 32 cents for Iowan, not every Iowan.
Per year or?
Per year.
Just for nitrates?
No, that's for the recommendation that the scientists gave me for what we should have for a minimum water monitoring network. That's really not too much to ask for an investment in public health. And so our number one priority for our policies was to fund what we need for a water monitoring network in Iowa. Public health and to track our progress. Then we shifted to, you heard someone talk there from scientists too. We approach this from a watershed level, which is what everyone believes we need to do because each watershed is different, but the source of any contaminants are within the watershed. It's why the monitoring system needs to be set up on a watershed level, because then you can, if you identify a problem, you can search in that watershed for the source of the problem. So we need a statewide water plan based on a watershed level monitoring and implementing measures to clean up that water. Then we focused on the inverse, if you will, of our Iowa nutrient reduction strategy. I don't know if you're familiar with that, but we've had in place since 2012, I believe, in response to the EPA and the Gulf hypoxia. Gulf hypoxia is the 5,000 to 8,000 square mile dead zone in the Gulf of Mexico from the Mississippi River. Mississippi River is the watershed for 31 states, 2 Canadian provinces. Think of the rivers: Missouri, the Ohio, the Illinois, Mississippi, obviously. Iowa is responsible for as much as 40% of all the contaminants flowing in and causing Gulf hypoxia. So where was I going with that? Oh, so the nutrient reduction strategy was what Iowa put in place, which is the voluntary process for agriculture to address and they're responsible, as you saw in the report, for 80% of the nutrient overload and the contamination of water supplies. That most everything is called edge of field practices. That's filtering out the problem after you created it. Our approach was, why don't we stop creating it in the first place? Seems to make sense. So we focused on the application of fertilizer and calling for removing the sales tax exemption or a per ton fee for fall fertilizer application. This fall you all saw those great big bullet trucks out there in the fields. We know that the largest share of nutrient and nitrogen that doesn't get absorbed, that largest percentage of runoff is from fall application. And the only reason it's put on the fall is a matter of convenience. So if we know that's a huge contribution to the water contamination, we have to have a disincentive for farmers to put on fall fertilizer. And the farmers in our group, and these were, I'd say, historically conservative organization farmers, they were like, yes, you've got to do this. It drives them crazy to see their neighbors putting on fall fertilizer. So that, I was encouraged by that we'll have some support from some more conservative farmers. They know the data, and it's not responsible. That is one of our funding sources that will more than pay for the water quality monitoring network and almost everything we're proposing. So that is fall fertilizer. Then we looked at the CAFOs, which, as you heard the scientists say, also are a large contributor to the nutrient overload. We have a lengthy section on CAFOs, beginning with a moratorium on CAFOs in any watershed that's impaired in Iowa. That's most of the state. We have soil tests and documentation that the soil that the manure is applied upon has the assimilative capacity to absorb those nutrients so they don't wash into the tile network or surface water and create contamination. We call for funding, geospatial monitoring. So we had the capacity through technology to track where manure is applied, and is it applied on the land that's in their manure management plan? Is it applied at a absorption level that the land will take that nutrient and not run off? So we call for geospatial monitoring and soil testing as part of the application plan to make sure that they have adequate land with the ability to absorb these nutrients. And then we call for a relook at the master matrix, which is what has to be followed for the CAFOs. It is not often followed, and there's very little enforcement of it. So there's a whole section on redoing the master matrix, empowering local government again to have siting authority for CAFOs. So those are the highlights of the nutrient inputs. So we address this before it has to be filtered out by sound practices to make sure the soil has the ability to absorb these nutrients. It doesn't end up in our water supply. Then we looked at some remedial measures. Cover crops are a big one. They have a low adoption rate right now. There's not been much progress since originally proposed in the nutrient reduction strategy. We know that is both a great soil health measure, farmers who have been in it for long enough are seeing the economic value of it. And we know that that helps the field absorb these nutrients, keeping them there for the plants, the crops that they're planting, not running into the water supply. And then the other remedial that we added was the buffer strips of 50 foot throughout Iowa and all of our rivers and streams, which is more for surface runoff and probably more for phosphorus runoff, which what attaches to soil and washes into our rivers and streams, and also addresses some of the things that Dr. Ruby talked about with our recreational waters. So those are the two primary areas on the remedial side. We didn't discuss saturated buffers and bioreactors. So we did discuss wetlands restoration. But those edge of field practices, if you look at the cost return on those and how many acres they actually service for the cost, it really is a poor investment of taxpayer dollars. And we've funded over $100 million of taxpayer money over the 12 years of this nutrient reduction strategy. And as the report said, we're not any better off than when we started. So we've got to change the focus to the infield practices. Then we have a fairly lengthy session on tile drainage.
What is tile drainage?
So tile drainage is, which is what we originally drained. Iowa was not like it is today, right? We were the most modified landscape in America. It was wetlands and especially up to that Des Moines and Raccoon River watershed. So tile, we have, can't think the number off the top of my head, but it is tens of thousands of miles of drainage tile in the fields, 4 foot underground, that remove the water from the fields so plants can grow and don't get oversaturated.
And where does it drain to?
Drains to, you go out to any, probably creek here and any flatland you have, and you'll see those tiles going right into the drainage ditch, right into the stream, right into the rivers, right into the water supply.
And so it can have all those nitrates in it.
Pardon?
So it'll have all those nitrates in it.
Exactly. So what they do is any nitrates or any nutrients that aren't absorbed by the soil or the plants wash down in the tile drainage system right out into the water supply. That was the nucleus of the Des Moines water lawsuit. And one interesting thing is drainage districts in Iowa have taxing authority and they have eminent domain authority. So we built upon that to make drainage districts more responsible for what is coming out of that watershed, from that drainage district into the watershed. We give authority for testing water coming out of the drainage tile so that we can identify the sources of high nutrient pollution. And then, like I said, there's an extensive 11 points of reform in the drainage district law that we think will help address this. This is if I were to pick out the two most major contributors, it's the drainage district system, and it's the irresponsible spreading of livestock manure that are either washing off in the surface water or going down into the drainage tile and into the rivers and streams. There's a couple more. Then we shifted to, we want to make this a better path forward for farmers who are mass producing two commodities to sell for a loss so that taxpayers can make up the difference. So refunding the Leopold Center at Iowa State University, which does farmer education and research on alternative crops, on regenerative farming, organic farming, so that farmers have other options that actually we believe are better economically for them and better for our environment. We do a number of things. We make curriculum integration through the ag school for these alternative farming methods and regenerative farming, so anybody that comes out of Iowa State with an ag degree knows about soil health, knows about water quality, and knows how to address it. Just for an example. Fund research and cancer connections. The governor's $1 million cancer funding is not going to be the tip of the iceberg. Right. So we need more data so we can make sure we are protecting public health and in connections with cancer with these farm nutrients. Alternatives and market development for alternative crops, and we instruct the Iowa Department of Economic Development to work with the region's institutions to make sure that they are promoting what is needed for establishing markets for alternative crops and food production. Then, probably repeat myself a little bit, we address the watershed governance with a state water plan and then staffing for the enforcement of this. And we tie in that with the monitoring network. Looking at penalties and enforcement, right now those manure spills you heard about are treated as a cost of doing business. We've got to have penalties that will actually modify behavior. Right. That's what, for penalties to have, I mean, I don't know about you, but I don't have any speeding tickets, but when I got one many years ago, I'm a little more cautious now, right? So we need to modify behavior, and that's through the enforcement and the penalties. And we call for staffing up the DNR to be able to enforce the master matrix plans, working with the drainage districts. We call for funding the Iowa Water Land Legacy, which is the constitutional amendment Iowans overwhelmingly voted for. I make up the year, was it 2011 maybe? Huh? Yeah, the 3.8 sales tax. But we do insist that it be utilized on the original funding formula. So it's not co-opted to pay for things that we believe farmers should be doing without the taxpayer subsidies. Some of it goes towards that. But we also, big reason that passed was the dedication to recreation, trails, and to make Iowa more livable and a great place to live. So that was, some of our folks were really interested in getting I-Will passed, but we want to make sure they stick to the original plan and formula for that. On the funding side, as I mentioned, fall fertilizer tax, either removing the sales tax exemption or applying a per ton fee for fall fertilizer usage. The second one is a per head fee for livestock. As you mentioned, or one of the speakers mentioned, we have about 25 million hogs in the state now. I had it on a slide, but I'm going to go to my slide. Literally a market hog, I'm trying to think now what I just calculated. Let's say a market hog will bring you $260 today. 20 cents, 8/1000th of that is what we think you could assess for every market hog, just 2 dimes. And then a penny for each dozen eggs, and a similar amount for cattle, and that would be a significant funding source from the industry that is creating the problem to help pay for these items that will address the problem. A common theme through our funding sources was to make sure that the people who create the pollution have the responsibility for addressing the pollution. And then the last one is we're seeing a much greater percentage of Iowa ag land now owned by non-farmers. I think it's north of 60%. Some through inheritance, but a lot through these conglomerates that are pooling money and buying up ag farmland. If you own an apartment building in Fairfield, you pay a commercial property tax rate because you made an investment in that for renting or leasing. Now, we don't call for near as high a percentage on ag land, but this actually I've got some reflection support from some conservative senators who are worried about Iowans not owning farmland anymore. That their property tax gets ramped up about 40%, but they can reduce it back down to where it was if they deploy these measures. If they don't, that funding goes towards the local soil and water conservation district in the county to help promote these practices that we know will clean up the water supply. Those 3 funding sources will more than pay for everything we proposed here. And none of it at a cost that is 20 cents per pig. Now, I know the price of a dozen eggs has been quite controversial for the last year, but I don't think a penny is going to make that much difference. And we produce a lot of eggs in Iowa. We're the #1 egg producer. Then, just quickly on the federal side, we have to stop rewarding the overproduction of commodity crops, and we have to tie the benefits that taxpayers are paying for to conservation. A very strict tie to the deployment of conservation measures, so the farmers can get the same level of income, but it goes towards conservation measures, not for overproduction of commodities that we're now selling for a loss. I don't know, makes sense to me. And then no crop insurance subsidy for row crops that are planted in the 2-year floodplain. Right now, farmers will plant 2-year floodplain year in, year out, knowing that it's going to lose money. But they make it up with crop insurance. And that is the land that's most vulnerable to washing off and spilling over into creeks and rivers. We shouldn't expect taxpayers to subsidize something that you know you're planting that's going to be a loss. Then tie crop insurance subsidies to alternative uses and tie it to the highly erodible land so you don't get as much insurance. We take the incentive away for planting on highly erodible land. The Conservation Reserve Program, get away from the 10-year whole farm system and target permanent easements for highly erodible land. No EQIP dollars for CAFOs. Taxpayers don't need to be funding CAFOs environmental measures. They should actually bear that burden themselves. It's like, the Environmental Quality Improvement Program is funded through the Farm Bill, and that we say that shouldn't be subsidies for CAFOs to meet environmental measures. It's kind of like Fairfield giving a tax break to Walmart so they can put your small businesses out of business, right? And then changing overall the focus of the Farm Bill to not be supply inducing, not be demand boosting, but more on the supply control side. And that's largely done through changing the incentives around conservation, not planting in the 2-year floodplain, which changes the incentive for just full out production to implementing conservation measures that in turn will bring some supply down and hopefully result in profit margins that will make farmers better off. So I went through that pretty quick. And this Diane will let you know when this all gets posted to the Harkin Institute website. There will be the paper that walks through all of this. There will be an advocate guide. There will be a legislative briefing and an executive summary. So you'll be able to get all that information, which is the last point I want to wrap up on. The reason, and especially for the advocate's guide and the executive summary, if you have time, I hope you can read the whole thing. It's lengthy, but that's the third phase. I want to make you feel empowered and comfortable and confident to show up at your legislative coffees and ask your representatives and senators, will they support funding a water monitoring network? Yes. And here's why. Will they support measures that address the nutrient application of nutrients that are ending up our water supply? And you'll have some talking points as to why that's important. Because until we convert this information we have now with the study and the policies to political pressure, nothing's going to change. And so what we're hopeful is for the rest of the session, you show up at coffees and you push hard on the monitoring and anything else you want to pick up. And then through the 2026 election cycle, you ask candidates where they stand on this. I think our water crisis has the capacity, like it's never had before to influence our political discourse and debate. But it only does so if we're raising the question and the issue. So I'll stop there. I know we went too long, Diana.
Q&A. I want to introduce Mike Carberry, just to come up and speak just a couple of minutes, no more than that. Mike is a long-time CAFO fighter. He's been supportive of regenerative agriculture, and we just hired Mike as our new development director. And he's here to help us raise more money for JFAN so we can do more things like this and have more influence in the state as well as locally. And so Mike is just going to talk for a minute or two about, you know, why it's important.
Thank you, Diane. Let's hear it again for John and for Adam. This report was so important, and it was done on 2 watersheds that don't come into Jefferson County, but water does not recognize territorial boundaries, and neither does politics really. And JFAN has worked to protect the waters and the people in Jefferson County for over 20 years. But it has really worked beyond Jefferson County and has led the fight against CAFOs throughout the state. It has been a leader, and one of the things that it has done is it organized, through Diane's efforts with Chris Peterson, it organized something called the Iowa Alliance for Responsible Agriculture. And that is an organization and an alliance of about 30 different groups that fight CAFOs and promotes responsible, regenerative, and organic agricultures, which are part of the answers here. But JFAN is rising to meet the moment. We have seen that we have a cancer crisis in Iowa, and we have seen that there is a definite link. What's in the water, where did it come from, and what can we do about it? We are rising to meet the moment, and the board of JFAN saw fit to hire 2 people. Communications and organization person, Becca. Stand up, Becca, and say hi. and myself. And I have worked on these issues for almost 25 years out of Iowa City. A lot of you have seen me down here in this room with the Sierra Club, the Iowa Renewable Energy Association. I love Fairfield, and I may move down here if Bob has anything to do about it. But we need to meet the moment. And what we need is, we're not a membership organization. We work on donations. And so it's through the donations of the people of Jefferson County that has taken us as far as we've gone so far. But we're gonna need more help to meet that moment. And we are gonna continue to work in Jefferson County to protect the water, the land, and the people. But we need to continue that leadership within the state and all the way up to Des Moines to do the list that John gave us. And we need your help. So we left an envelope on everybody's table or chair. If you can see fit to give us another donation, if you haven't already, if you'd like to give us a recurring donation, a sustainable donation, that would be great. My card's on the back. If you want to sit down and talk about giving your a donation to us of a larger amount, I would love to have lunch with you. And so I'm taking up enough of your time, but thank you again for coming. And let's hear it for Diane Rosenberg. I will turn it back over to Diane. Thank you again for coming, and I look forward to meeting all of you in person if I haven't already. Thank you.
Mike, thank you so much. And as I said, very happy. We've got Mike with us, and we've got Becca Vignard with us as well as our communications and operations coordinator. So we're doing well here. But we're doing well because we've got the support of people in the community and beyond. So I'm going to turn this over now. We have run a little bit late, but I want to make sure that we have a lot of questions.
If you need to leave, do not consult me. Feel free, but happy to stick around and ask questions as long as you got them. Yes?
I want to ask you 2 questions that are related. The first one is, so was it specifically the lobbyists for the agricultural industry that got the legislators to reduce funding for the monitoring system? question?
What, the question was what ag lobby?
Was it the lobbyists for the agricultural industry that got the legislators to defund or?
I don't have any emails or phone messages as evidence of who actually got it done.
But there,
Go ahead.
there was this chain of events, right, where Chris Jones was working at the University of Iowa and was a prominent critic of most of the legislature, but especially like the people running the legislature. And he, it was reported that, his boss got a phone call from Iowa state legislators and he got pushed out of his job. And then the network was defunded not that long afterwards. So, I mean, I don't, you can't say this is the reason, but there's a pretty compelling chain of events, I think, that points in that direction.
Yeah, thanks for that.
So my follow-up question is, what's your guess? Is it promise of funding, or is it threats, or what makes legislators make this big of a change?
Follow the money.
Make the change to defund it in the first place, you mean?
Yes. How does it work behind the scenes? Because if we understand that better, we know better what we need to do.
Yeah, so common theory would be that if you don't have data, then you can't point to there being a problem. So there's no impetus for developing initiatives or policies or laws that will address the problem. And as Adam said, there was definitely a connection made to Jones, who was running the water monitoring network, and the posts that he had posted, which were critical of what the CISWRA report said is 80% of this comes from agricultural practices. And so if you don't want to be accountable for this, then that would have been the first and most productive step to avoid accountability, is to not have science or data that supports what we know.
So why do legislators go along with that?
Somebody had that.
I mean, so there are really big trade organizations that, make a lot of money off the current system, and their political power is, is unmatched financially from any other group. And so, when I learned about organizing, I heard that, there's organized money and there's organized people, and we are not very competitive when it comes to organized money, because the groups that are making money, are able to put a lot of emphasis on, donating to groups that are supporting what they want to do. But that's part of why it's important that we organize people, and that there's an alternative source of energy that can go up against the money. And I guess I would also just add that we've been really lucky to work a lot with Iowa Farmers Union, which is a great group of representing small farmers, and some of these other big trade groups like to present themselves as representing farmers, even though they're really kind of representing a handful of companies that make the bulk of the money. So I would encourage people, and Jonathan's with Iowa Farmers Union, I would encourage people to connect with Iowa Farmers Union to get a more realistic perspective of what small farmers would like to see, and people who are open to having conversations. So, yeah.
You just said that the moment has come for water quality. I think is more or less what you said. I think when you're talking about organizing people, assuming we don't have a lot of money, I think what resonates with people is cancer and the threat of cancer. So Iowa does have this huge cancer problem. It's not apparently all related to water. I mean, there's lung cancer, there's smoking, there's radon, which is a big deal. To the extent you can associate whatever is in the water with cancer, that's going to be, I think, a very compelling message for more human beings.
Thank you.
Water quality is important too.
It is, no, I agree. And that's where the work that the Harkin Institute is doing, Adam can talk more about it on the cancer research. But I think that is one of the reasons I hear from legislators, other candidates, they're getting asked everywhere they go about the water crisis. And I think a lot of that is fueled by the information that has come out on our cancer rates.
Yeah, I agree with that, and just to build off of that and what Diane referenced earlier, so the Harkin Institute partnered with Iowa Environmental Council and Iowa Farmers Union on a project specifically about the environmental risk factors of cancer. And there are two components of that. One was a literature review, that is what Diane mentioned, is going to be coming out in a couple weeks. And so it looks at different environmental risk factors, which includes radons, pesticides, PFAS, which are the forever chemicals, and then nitrates specifically. And I am just really, I think it's a great report, and so I'm really excited for it to come out. And then the other component of that was we did listening sessions around the state, and I think you guys hosted one. I wasn't at the one here, but you know, we went to 15 different locations around the state, and backing what you said, everywhere we went, people, you know, everyone in the crowd was impacted by cancer and just really motivated to do something about it. And it wasn't just urban areas, right? It was every corner of the state where people cared. So definitely appreciate the point you're making.
Yes.
So we have had Chris Jones here quite a few times, and it's been wonderful to stay and to hear this new information. And in terms of what can be done, what?
Yeah.
In terms
We'll
of
stand up
louder.
if you would.
Oh, I can
And
talk.
viva voce.
In terms of what can be done now, that's different than when Chris spoke to us 2 or 3 years ago. I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around all the possibilities that was in that wonderful but dense talk that you gave. And that is, it seems to me that the data, now we have more data. That would be one major thing that you're bringing to us tonight, correct? The other thing that politically now is a lever that we didn't have 2 or 3 years ago, because the Sierra Club here has been interested in water monitoring for a long time, but hasn't gotten, you know, there's not been the push behind it. You know, you just can't do something in your own community. So the cancer scare and all of the national publicity that is so bad for Iowa is another big lever that you're bringing to us that we can work on. Now, is there, you also mentioned that some conservative farmers are now on board, and we also know from SILT and its different educational groups that a lot more people, not a lot, but people are now more interested in soil health. And these two really go together. I mean, and you're not really saying that, and I'm not criticizing, it's just that the average person doesn't really realize that if they're not in farming or in this kind of group. So I am really interested now, given the tariffs, which we don't know how that's influenced, because you mentioned that farmers are losing money. Now they're really losing money. And we don't know that besides how much $12 billion that the government gave farmers, I don't know how that's gonna, but so you mentioned taxing different, not taxing and then taxing different to get funding for these ideas, which are fabulous, and I think we all would like to get behind it. So do you see this particular moment as those levers, those just really 2 levers that I'm seeing, or maybe 3, the data, the cancer scare, and more conservative farmers or more farmers on board with you? Would you say that that's kind of the, you know, the bow to break the water there, or what are we really looking at that's different now than we looked at 2 years ago? And I hope that's not too redundant.
No, it's a great question. I mean, that's kind of the impetus for doing the CISWRA report is so we have some hard, irrefutable data of how serious the water situation is and what's causing it. And so I think that's a little bit of a game. It's a game changer for us. I do think that the reason we're getting some other farmers interested is they realize they can't continue on this path. Right. And there is increasing knowledge about soil health. And we addressed soil health. I didn't get into it tonight, but we addressed different things like the highly erodible land, and the funding for regenerative farming, and there's a number of places in the paper we talk about soil health, because it goes together. So I think just a better informed public.
So the direction that you're asking us to take after hearing this is what?
Monitor.
Organized? No, we can't all monitor.
No, but to push for it, sorry.
Yeah. No, that's right, yeah, right.
That was number one.
I mean, I think, if there's one drumbeat we need to have the next 2 months with the current legislature is monitoring.
I guess I will say too, I mean, the energy of that CISWRA presentation was really amazing, like with all those people in the room and just like how motivated and like how loud they were, and I remember telling my wife afterwards, I don't know how other people in here feel, and I know there have been like some good moments, but I sort of feel like over the trajectory of my life, the political situation is getting more and more bleak in a lot of ways, and it was weird to be part of this event where it like felt like there was a really interesting positive change in terms of like how willing people are right now to being talking about some of the problems with our current agricultural system. And I do think the water quality and the cancer issue is part of opening up people's mind to think, oh, maybe there's a better way of doing this. So anyways, just to me, that felt like a moment of, I think it'll take time, it's like turning around a big ship, but I do feel like there's enough information now from the CISWRA report, and people aren't gonna tolerate forever, having high cancer rates, and so I do think it's, there's reason to think that it's going to change eventually, and hopefully sooner rather than later.
I would encourage you, besides cancer, to consider rise in Parkinson's and Alzheimer's disease as one of the things in which there might be an interaction between glyphosate, paraquat for crop dehydration, and the nitrate burden on those types of molecules that create cancer, particular hepatic cancers. So there's a relationship there that I think it would do well for the monitoring system to also include glyphosate and paraquat, because it is something that's applied to the crops during harvesting for dehydration, as I understand it.
Yeah, it's a huge source of it.
Yes.
So that's something I guess that John could talk a little bit.
That's one of the rationales for going beyond what we were monitoring before.
Right.
That's
So
the report said we
extend-
actually test for other chemicals.
Right. I think that would be very good.
Yeah.
And I know John and other people in Fairfield especially are doing some really interesting research on that. So yeah, I definitely think it's worth talking about.
Oh, who's next?
Go ahead, you
Me? Okay, I just wanted to know about, when you were talking about the fall fertilizer, and you want them to reduce that, what is the alternative? What would you have the farmers do at a different time, or not do it at all? Oh, just, and why is it better to do it at a
So we
different
go into
time?
more, she asked about the fall fertilizer, we go into more detail that it needs to be tracked for the total maximum load, TMLD, I'm sorry, forget the acronym. But if they go outside, if they apply more, then we know that soil has the capacity to absorb, that there's penalties for that. But most importantly, that they apply it in the spring, because that's when the plants are ready to uptake it. You don't get the runoff of, Des Moines over, for right now, over 10 milligrams in their water supply right now, which is rare in the winter. But yeah, main thing is to get them change behavior so they plant in the spring.
Okay.
And then apply within the range that we know the plants will uptake that, so they aren't over applying.
I think, I'm Bob Kraus, I'm running for U.S. Senate, but I think there is a federal role in here also, and I think it's wonderful what you guys have done, elevating the issue and conceptualizing a lot of things. And just sitting here, I was thinking that on a federal level, if we had legislation that would require states to create carcinogen mitigation plans. We're 50 in cancer in this state. Kentucky's next, and then we got 25 below average. So I think there would be national support for something like that. One thing it would do, we're always doing cost sharing whenever we do planning, and if we do planning on mitigation that you folks have really discovered, I think there would be an opportunity to find allies around the country so that Monsanto and Bayer would be taking on more than just Iowa activist groups. So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, we didn't go as deep into the Farm Bill, because I covered it pretty short at the end here, but changing the whole focus to conservation versus oversupply is critical. So much of our farming is driven by the Farm Bill. So we know we have to address that as well.
And just one other point. One other point about that is just in case people aren't aware, if you look at the subsidies for agriculture, I think your point is very well taken that how much money the state provides is pretty small compared to how much money the federal government is providing. And so you're right that on some level there has to be change at the federal level in order to really shift the incentives in the right direction.
Yes.
How much does the monitoring cost per year, and how much money has been lost because of the tariffs?
So it's been funded consistently at $600,000 a year. The funding right now through June was to a grant from the Walton Foundation. And essentially we're gonna go to a GoFundMe program for public health July 1. And so the Iowa City, doctors from Iowa City's plan was $1 million plan, which expands it beyond nitrates to other chemicals as well.
Wasn't the state paying for it before?
Did the state pay for it before?
Did the state pay for it before?
Yes, yes.
Okay, so they cut it down, so now you're getting private funding to keep it going?
The Walton family, the state cut it 2 years ago. Walton Family Foundation stepped in and said, we'll fund it for 2 years, but we won't, it's not a long-term thing. We're just covering it for 2 years. And so now it's set to expire coming up. Does that answer?
So if you remember one of those slides, there were 80 monitors, but 20 of those are from geological survey. Those would stay in place, but the 60 go away.
And how much money did we lose because of the tariffs? Because I thought the soybean farmers got hurt.
What was that?
How much money did we lose from the tariffs?
Yeah.
Oh.
We don't know. Millions. Millions.
Oh no, it's 25, higher than that.
32 cents, just remember that.
3
dimes, 2 pennies for each Iowan.
That's a very good visual, by the way.
So over the years and over the decades, most of the legislation that's ever been created, promoted, or pushed for environmental better changes has been on the Democratic side of the aisle. So I wanted to know if, in your recollection over the last 40 years, has there been any legislation pushed by the Republicans? And there must have been some people saying no to this canceling of the monitoring program, hopefully, in the current legislature, or not?
I don't know the vote in 2023, what the vote count was on entering the monitoring, so
Is there any effort to restore the monitoring?
There was a proposal made by the House Democratic Caucus a couple weeks ago to restore. It's just to restore the funding, which I try to insist on. Don't just restore the funding. Give us what we need.
Expand it.
And it's
So since
that visual. It's
cancer
not
affects
that
everybody,
much. Huh?
Since cancer affects everybody, aren't there some Republicans who care enough about this issue to do something or do something different than what they've been doing?
So I'm going to him because I can't hear.
So given that cancer affects everyone, are there some Republicans who are motivated to do that? I mean, I guess I don't know specific names, but I do know that they're persuadable. And so like one example was last year there was the pesticide immunity bill that came up, and I think the fact that Iowa had such high cancer rates probably played a role in Republicans joining Democrats to ultimately defeat that pesticide immunity bill. Also, some people call it the Cancer Gag Act, like that would protect all the pesticide companies from lawsuits. So I think there's evidence that it does have some political momentum.
And I want to say that bill is still alive. It hasn't, it may not go forward because there is mixed feelings, you know, in the House. It passed in the Senate. There are mixed feelings in the House on both sides. It doesn't have complete Republican support, and we're going to have to wait and see where that's all going to go. But right now, there is at least that. But it, you know, it's not completely dead. If it doesn't pass this year, it will be dead.
Well, there is an effort afoot in the U.S. Congress to pass something similar and take that authority away from states to.
We're trying to get it into the farm bill.
Right.
Yeah.
Watch out.
And SCOTUS is going to hear a case that could also affect whether or not these pesticide immunity bills are going to be with us or not.
Yeah, speaking of the federal level, I was wondering if the Trump administration is going to interfere with your plans in any way. I saw a piece of information back here about Trump attacking the Clean Water Act, for instance.
Right.
So you're saying I should keep an eye on my rearview mirror as we drive back to Des Moines?
Check your brake lines.
My guess is they got bigger fish to fry, but who knows?
That's why this grassroots movement that you're really talking about is so important. Because we, the people, have to stand up and let the people that are in Washington, D.C., or that we send there, get the message that if they want our vote, that they have to earn it, and that they will support the policies that you're going to put together and we take out there and suggest to everyone. Just a thought.
All right, thank you all very much for being here.